All right, everyone. So welcome back. Next up, I have the honor to introduce Syreeta Nolan. So Syreeta Nolan is a disability advocate at University of California, San Diego, majoring in human health psychology. She serves as underrepresented student officer for the University of California Student Association and co-founded UCSA's Disability Ad Hoc Committee that will be pursuing nonprofit status to expand their mission to disabled students, faculty, staff, and alumni. She is also the co-founder of the Disabled in Higher Education on Twitter. So you can follow this movement at DISIN, capital HIGHER, capital ED. I just learned the caps matter. And her personal Twitter at @Nolan_Syreeta. Syreeta identifies as Black, disabled, bisexual woman, and her lived experiences have informed her advocacy goals along with her career goals. She hopes to go to graduate school for health policy and management towards her goal of transforming the mental health field through comprehensive preventative systems similar to what we have in our physical health system. So you can expand your perspective at her blog, and I'll just read the first part.
Yeah, you can go with that.
The www.blackinneuro.com. All right, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is truly my honor to join you all today. This is my first in-person event as a disability advocate, and I feel it's really critical to bring to this space my intersection of chronic pain, medical trauma, and Blackness. So with that, we look at our learning objectives for today. So we'll be identifying intersectionality and medical trauma to empower each other to make safer spaces for patients, but also for each other who identify as disabled, and tips on how to become more disability inclusive, both within and beyond the clinic. So feel free to live with us today. SD Pain is also live tweeting, so you can feel free to mention their hashtag, my hashtag for Black Disabled Empowerment in Higher Education Month, and your tweets. And remember any alt text or any images, screenshots, or GIFs. Alt text is basically describing an image. So like on the right, you have Black and Disabled in Higher Ed's logo, orange background, the brown name has Black and Disabled in Higher Ed, a stack of 2 books with an apple and a Black empowerment fist with the infinity symbol for neurodiversity. So today, it's really important that both online and here in person, that we set up a safe space where you can share your thoughts and your experiences without judgment. And we can also ask any question, but be willing to listen to understand rather than to respond, and being kind to each other in our discussion spaces, both here and online. So today, I identify as a proud, disabled, Black, bisexual, Indigenous woman. I realize that of these identities, I can be proud to be Black, I can be proud to be bisexual, I can be proud to be Indigenous, I can be proud to be a woman. But in today's society, being proud of being disabled is not something that is encouraged. It's not something that's seen as an identity, as so much as when we were listening to the prior presentation on the chronic pain of racism, I heard racism, sex, and gender spoken of, but never did disability as an identity come up within that conversation. So the Black feminist disability framework has really helped me to understand more what it means to exist at this intersectional identity. Because we have this myth, being Black women, that we're supposed to be strong, able to endure pain, and we're going to forward every circumstance, pull ourselves up by bootstraps. And this is not something that can always be done. Like, innate tenacity just means we had to create resilience, but it also means that we're disallowed disability, because without speaking about disability, without speaking about ableism, it just becomes a meaning of weakness, where Black means strength. And our survival is depoliticized. Every Black man that has died from calling for a mental health crisis is a disabled Black man whose disability status is stripped in the calls of Black Lives Matter. Survival is just a form of resistance for us. And somehow, every day, something has tried to kill many of us and has failed. And sometimes that thing that feels like it's trying to kill us is a medical system that's supposed to be helping us survive. When we discuss intersectionality and we bring in DEI experts, they may have expertise in a lot of the areas in this pretty little flower graphic: sex, gender, sexual identities, religion, age, ethnicity, race. Next time you hire a DEI consultant, ask if they have any experience in disability as identity, disability as diversity, and most of them will say no. Because what intersectionality means as a Black, disabled, Indigenous, bisexual woman is that intersectionality is about fighting the discrimination within discrimination. So it may be racism that you see visually, but I don't look disabled most times. I am dynamically disabled, so sometimes I've got my cane in the car and it's with me. So I battle that ableism. I battle that within all the discrimination. I battle the inequities as a Black woman. I battle that along with the inequities of being disabled. I am that minority of being Black and bisexual, but I'm also a minority of being disabled, which is the largest minority group in our country. And when we talk about disability, the reason it's excluded from most DEI experts is because it's not seen as DEI because of the impacts of the medical model, where we have your disability diagnosed by a doctor, you have disability benefits, where disability means you are too disabled to work. So this is why you need disability benefits. You have disability accommodations in higher education, person first language as, like, let's say I'd say I'm a woman with disability and disability as weakness. But for me, for the disability community that came together to start the ADA, it's a social model that we see where disability is a strength, and it's not a bad word. Having fibromyalgia is a blessing because it makes me realize when I need to rest. It slows me down when I need to be slowed down. My ADHD helps me be creative. There is good in every disability, but our society doesn't subscribe to beliefs such as these. Self-diagnosis is valid. It's valid in our community, but it comes invalid everywhere else because of the frames our society places around it. Disability as identity. My disability pronouns are invisibly disabled, dynamically disabled, disabled woman, and neurodivergent. My gender pronouns are she, her, hers. That is my identity. That is who I celebrate. And disability as a diverse community, the deaf community and deaf game, it's amazing what you can learn from our communities. An identity first language, a disabled woman. Because right now, I'm woman with really cool clicker thing. I could put really cool clicker thing down, woman without really cool clicker thing. Like, if I am woman with disability, there is no physical manifestation of my disability that I can pick up and put down at will. I am a disabled woman. It is one with who I am. And I'm not fighting a disease, battling a disease. I live at peace with every disability that I have. And I learn the ebbs and flows of how my body-mind relates to each other. And we all have these different privileges versus barriers. Being a Black disabled woman is very different than being a white disabled woman, because within disability advocacy, you have these frames of balance. Within health, we have these frames of balance. Disability is too white. Our health systems are too white. So the privileges will look different, like the advantages that we each have. The barriers will look different, like the disadvantages that we each have. For me, some of my privileges are having a diagnosis because it allowed accommodations through higher education. Having an interventional pain management doctor I trust allowed me to have care that I felt was respectful of who I am as a whole person. Having health insurance allows me to get expensive injections to manage my pain. But the barriers I have, who I am as a Black woman is a barrier. Who I am in having low income and not being able to afford the $20 a session fee for physical therapy is a barrier. And mental illness and medical trauma is a barrier. And I'm going to be gut level honest with you in my next slide. So my conditions, so I live with a lot of physical health conditions. I have myasthenia gravis, diagnosed when I was 18. That diagnosis was stripped from me by a neurologist, and a lot of medical trauma that happened there. I have carpal tunnel and tennis elbow and sciatica, fibromyalgia and gastroparesis. Every moment, something hurts to a different degree. And sometimes that pain scale paints black and white what a 10 is supposed to look like, what a 5 is supposed to look like. I don't look like I'm in anything until it's like maybe 9. But what makes this more difficult is sanism within our healthcare systems. Because having mental health conditions like ADHD, PTSD, major depressive disorder, and borderline personality disorder, you find your doctors looking at you different. You find them listening to you differently. You find them wondering if your pain is really there or if you've really created it. You see all the questions and the judgments, even though they don't say them out loud. I feel that. And even in my mental health care, I suffered severe medical trauma. Like, for the trigger warning of rape, I was raped twice in intensive inpatient psychiatric units. It's like these 2 hospitals in Florida had spoken to each other. I told them what happened, and they're like, "Oh no, I saw something in your chart that said you were sexually inappropriate, so this must not have happened." So a place that was supposed to be a safe locked unit became locked away with my rapists and staff that would not protect me. I've had EMGs go sideways, where 2 hours in, they are disregarding my pain, patting me on the head like I'm a dying dog or something, and then the whole office abandons me. I have had my first psychologist when I was 17 told me I'd never graduate from high school, go to college, have a job, fall in love. I'd end up schizophrenic and mentally dependent on my mom for the rest of my life. Medical trauma has shaped the way I interact with the healthcare system in the same way that I would interact with a man, because I'm scared of both. I step on both like I'm walking on eggshells. Medical trauma is something that you have a handout in front of you, cold clinical facts from the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, but it thinks about it just in a medical office. My trauma and medical traumas intersect with my traumas as surviving rapes that I've had outside of medical clinics. It intersects with everything that I've experienced. Medical trauma does not exist in isolation of the traumas I experience because I'm Black. The traumas I experience as a bisexual woman who was in a church, that my sponsor for Celebrate Recovery would tell me that if I was ever with a woman, I'm backsliding because I'm not supposed to do that. It's a sin. And then it becomes a point when it just becomes so exhausting to keep trying. This article about access fatigue talks about this quote on the second point. Says, "You get so tired of trying to explain to something that you just don't go into detail. You don't bring up the subject. You don't make an issue of it. Sometimes you say nothing at all." And access fatigue, this really demonstrates a pattern where it's almost like this learned helplessness within medical trauma. I'd love to do more in my physical health, pursue it, but I feel like somehow my voice is going to be nullified. I put up a tweet last night asking my friends to complete the sentence, "Medical trauma is." One of my friends replied, "Medical trauma is a real thing that too many people and patients go through. It is a result of a healthcare system run like a for-profit business, ableist attitudes of doctors and nurses, not seeing certain people as human beings who deserve proper medical care. Doctors, pay attention." And it's not only doctors, it's physical therapists, it's any healthcare profession that needs to pay attention and to really realize the weight of medical trauma. And like thinking about medical trauma, it's the resilience that sometimes people will be like, "Oh, you are so resilient to keep doing everything that you do." And we look at how psychology today defines resilience as this psychological quality that allows some people to be knocked down by adversities and come back as strong, or at least as strong as before, and to overcome failure. And highly resilient people find a way to change course, emotionally heal, and move towards their goal. But my perspective of resilience is a little different, because when people tell me that I am strong, I really am just so tired. I'm really just exhausted. There are so many systemic barriers, so much trauma, like as much as bad things as we can talk about of being disabled in higher ed. That's why I founded this organization and have since been named CEO. We have accommodations in higher ed, but not in our doctor's offices. I have asked my chronic pain providers so many times that don't tell me to email you after a procedure to tell you it's worked. I forget my chart messages every time, and it delays my getting those pain injections. I hear about resilience, and I don't want to be resilient. I have to be resilient. I deal with ableism alone because no one names it. Look at how much we name racism. Look at how much we name homophobia and LGBTQIA issues. That's why we see Black communities, queer communities, women rising up. Where do we see disabled people but knocked down time and time and time again because no one names it and claims it, because it's part of the foundation of our medical systems. We have so much that endangers our academic mental health in being disabled in higher education. What are disabled patient physical therapy students going through? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel safe to disclose? Do they have other disabled physical therapists to look up to? And also, I grieve my non-disabled self. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia 8 years ago during my abusive marriage, and I grieve that alone because grief is something that's for death, but it's not seen in those who become disabled. An acquired disability is a different kind of death because I can't go back to that 20-something human that would just jump out of bed lightly and not think about the amount of pain her body is in. I am not that person anymore, and I own that. And the resilience that I had to build being disabled, it always was placed as something that was a matter of building my individual capacity, having my amazing mom who's in the audience, hi mom. But really, resilience should be challenging social, attitudinal, and structural barriers that increase adversity in the lives of disabled people. And when we call for a change in resilience in disability and not requiring it anymore, there is a call that I'd like to make for disability justice, moving beyond equity. So let me set the stage here of this next set of images as a tale of two perspectives of inclusion as a marginalized patient. So we have our cute little apple tree. So our apple tree in the center is a system. You have on the left, there's more apples on the left, like maybe this is a Black patient. It's still not going great, but we've got more resources because we've got more access to opportunities. We have all these Black organizations moving forward. Like if you look at Twitter right now, you've got Black and X movements up the wazoo doing amazing things. And on the right, think of this as a disabled person. And on that first image in the upper left corner, you see that person standing there with a question mark above their head. Well, what about me? My communities will often not have a disability competency to talk about the plight of Black disabled people. Some advocates may hold that it's distracting from their message. Others may not know that they're even missing a community like ours, where I'll sit there and I'll be like, what about me? Like, as much as we can do for Black people, we need to include Black disabled people. If we get to equality where Black people and disabled people are getting equal levels of care, that's still not great because there's an exclamation point because it's hard. It's really hard to be disabled in today's medical system. We look at equality. Sure, I've got a customized, really tall ladder now that must have been really hard to get up on. I'm like, no, not that ladder. But at least I can reach an apple. But still, on the left side, you've got so many more apples because there are so many organizations fighting for the rights of Black patients, women, of queer patients, who fights for a patient who is disabled, who culturally identifies as disabled, who Like, what medical person even has a competency of what culturally identifying as disabled means, or even being indigenous, what it means to identify as part of a tribe that is not federally recognized. So even the National Indian Health Board doesn't recognize me. My tribe doesn't recognize me. It's just so many things that nullify me. Justice looks like that system being fixed. That's why you see those two stilts on this tree in the bottom right corner. You see each of the ladders being equally short. Thank gosh, it's easier to get up now. But having that equal access, equal respect, it's what looks like supporting disability justice within the clinic, where my disability pronouns become just as important as my gender pronouns and my sexual identity, where being able to have that open conversation of if they feel safe at home, but also with their medical teams. Is there someone that they're afraid of talking to? Are they not receiving the care they deserve because they don't feel like they deserve to say their truth? Do you have that patient's accommodations on file? Like, being neurodivergent, I don't like phone calls. I love texts and stuff, but there's no way to put that reference down. We don't save accommodations. Like, being disabled and going to physical therapy clinics sometimes means I am sat next to a physical athlete who just had like a sports injury about my same age, and I'm looking at them going, dang, is that supposed to be my life? Am I supposed to be able to do all these things? And sometimes it hurts more. So thinking of the positionality of patients and if they're comfortable where you're taking care of them, and also creating that safe space for them to gain tools to live their lives well. And beyond the clinic, realizing that many medical fields are quite ableist for disabled students, and taking time to talk to physically and mentally disabled PT students about the barriers that they have faced throughout their careers, and including disability within inclusion efforts. Hire disability consultants to come in, because the DEI expert is probably not going to know anything about disability. And being willing to learn about the scope and history of disability as well as the scope of ableism, because there is a really big difference between wheelchair user and wheelchair bound. Because wheelchair bound is an ableist phrase that says they're trapped in that wheelchair, where a wheelchair user is leveraging that wheelchair as a tool of freedom and respecting it just as much as you would any other part of their body. And there's so much more in the reference I've cited here. And where do we really go from here? It looks like culling out ableism, tearing down structural barriers, and learning where inaccessibility exists in your training programs, and reaching back as organizations, because most physical therapy clinics, most medical systems are situated within some proximity to a university, maybe a community college, and supporting disabled undergraduates and institutions who are interested in PT programs. Because for me, going through my undergrad at UCSD, graduating last year with my bachelor's with honors in human health psychology, no one reaches back for a disabled undergrad. It wasn't until I joined Twitter and found another disability advocate to create Disabled in Higher Ed that I knew what the culture was like to be disabled. I didn't have to work that hard to find out what it was like to be Black in higher ed, a woman in higher ed, bisexual in higher ed, indigenous in higher ed. I didn't have to put in that much work because I knew it, because there were those communities existing at the University of California, San Diego. But that a community does not exist being disabled because that community is not there. So I'd like to get you reacquainted with your discussion groups, because keep calm, it's discussion time. So my discussion question that I have for you all is, there's been increased focus on racism in medicine and that chronic pain of racism, as you see so eloquently described in our opening keynote. How can we begin to address ableism in medicine, both supporting disabled patients and providers, especially in this time of COVID? So Sarah, the next is yours, I guess.
Okay, so we should have a brainstorm for this. So again, both our online participants and everyone in the room, get back into your groups. please pick a scribe and just take how long would you like them to discuss?
20 minutes?
20 minutes for discussion. And then we will kind of come back together and wrap it up.
Yep. Sounds perfect. Any other questions, you can always contact me by DM on Twitter.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Again, in person and virtually. So we have got some great brainstorming that's been happening all over, I think, probably the world, which is pretty amazing. Just real quick, though, so for a little bit more interaction, we'd love to have, if anyone has questions. So I'd love to take one from the virtual world and then one from the in-person world here. So if you do have questions that you'd like to ask, please get those into the app, like right now. And Syreeta will address them and answer them. But then also we'll just have a little bit of time to think about and talk about the topics up on the screen. So any questions? All right, maybe we'll start discussing, and then if we have time at the end for questions, we'll take them.
Okay, we'll go with that because, I really love the brainstorming that's gone on, and it was so great to meet some of you virtually as well on the Zoom. For our top upvoted one of addressing ableism in medicine must start in the educational system, giving more people with disabilities the ability and opportunity to become providers is a big piece of what will change the culture in the system. But of course, that doesn't prioritize the bottom line. So I love not prioritizing the bottom line because the bottom line should be to first do no harm to our patients. And ableism in medicine really does start at our educational systems because it starts from the issues with getting accommodations for the MCAT, issues with getting accommodations for STEP, the inherent ableist culture of if a resident asks for time off, they might be putting more harm on other students they're with. Looking and addressing the ableist cultures within medicine and letting the change come from how they're recruiting. Having recruitment goals for disabled patients and disabled providers. I was a patient at UCSD Health first before I started as a student there. I told my providers I wanted to be there. So healthcare systems that are connected to healthcare facilities could recruit from their patients and give their patients grants and more support to really go through their education. Thinking about healthcare and academics, they're not separate as a disabled student. We choose our academics because of the healthcare system. So really leveraging a healthcare system could really create a way that it does prioritize the bottom line, because as a disabled patient, I would love to have a disabled doctor. But also, if my doctor is openly mentally ill, they might, if they put a mental disability on their medical license, it could jeopardize their license. Why does being human and having a mental illness or a physical illness jeopardize a license? When all of us became providers or humans or disabled, it never stopped us from being fully human. The prevalence of any disability did not say, oh no, wait, they're a physical therapist. We can't make them have this disability. No, that's not how this works. We're all human. So we have the same prevalence within our lives to develop any disability. So recognizing that and not expecting superhuman from students, from providers, and allowing each of us to fully exist in our body and minds without hiding it. Because hiding it is going to hurt more in the end. And I can only imagine the prevalence of PTSD that is being hidden within medical providers. And with dealing with COVID as long, what is long COVID doing to providers? I'm really looking forward to Daria's conversation later on. So that is absolutely critical. I love our next upvoted one of how to address workflow and processes for access in healthcare systems, how to create space for those disability advocates to have a seat at the table where decisions are being made and policies are being made. So really, when we're looking at these processes for access, have a way that you can note down accommodations, having a space where that flags in a patient's charts for communication preferences, locational preference in a clinic, things like that, and also being able to look at how we're creating space for those with disabilities. If we have someone reach out to upper management and say that they're a disability advocate, find a way to pay them for their service, for the inclusion of their advice. And I think that is truly critical. And did anyone have any questions?
Again, in the question, please, or for the questions, please get them into the app. And we do have one from online.
Perfect.
So from Karen Litzy, what are your suggestions for responses to the common statement made among PTs on social media? If you cannot perform, insert high-level strength training or performance exercise, then you are not qualified to teach it, which is an ableist statement.
Yeah, I think that not everyone needs to be able to perform it. There's this little thing called YouTube, and there's illustrational things. Why do we have technology if we're going to allow it to create ableist barriers within our societies? If a PT can't do it, that's great. Be human. I celebrate anyone who's not able to do a skill and just goes, hey, I'm bringing up my phone to show you this movement on my device. Being fat as well, I can't do everything, and I really love to see people that look more like me, you see, and be able to see that being who I am in my body is okay, and that I don't have to have all these really physically fit physical therapists that make me feel like fat slob sometimes. So I fully encourage that physical therapists should not place these ableist barriers on themselves, that these ableist barriers should be stripped away so that they can support everyone. If we're talking about movement, do you and leave the rest. And that's what we say to our patients. Is it less true for you as physical health providers, than for us as patients? Why won't you take your own advice?
Oh my gosh, and I think again, because there aren't any questions in the queue here, that's such a beautiful place to stop, is take our own advice and quit putting ableist issues as barriers, which almost as you say that, I'm that's kind of an oxymoron, but not, right? An ableist barrier.
It's almost like everything, that phrase that parents might say, do as I say, not as I do. It's well, what's the point? If you tell me my mental health matters and you're going to ignore your mental health, does it really matter as much as you're saying it matters? We can't create double standards within humanity. We're each equally human. You just have a couple more letters behind your name than I do.
I love it. All right, well, thank you so much, Syreeta. That was wonderful.